Shumai guys, welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. My name's Dav Morse, I'm your host. It's my job to learn and to educate, to equip and inspire you to live life to the full. It's always a pleasure to be back on the airwaves, and today is no different. Today we are starting a little mini-series called 7 Really Bad Life Tips You Need to Ignore. We're going to look at the 5 areas of life to the full. We're going to look at financial health. We're going to look at physical health. We're going to look at mental health, relational health, and spiritual health. And we're going to have a little mini-series of 7 tips you need to ignore in each of those categories. So we're going to kick off the series with 7 really bad financial tips you need to ignore. And number 7 is a bit of a controversial one. Now, one thing that really annoys me is when people put out these brash, bold statements with no idea of the nuance or no consideration of the nuance behind these ideas. So despite some of these being quite brash and brazen statements that you have to ignore, I'm going to do my best to look into and explore the caveats and the things, the times where they just might not work. So let's start with number 1 bit of financial advice you should definitely ignore. Number 1, keep your money safe in a cash ISA or a savings account. Keep your money safe in a cash ISA or a savings account. When I speak to people about saving and investing, if people have any savings at all, then it's most likely to be in a savings account rather than an investment account. Now, let me tell you why keeping your money safe in a cash ISA is a really bad idea. I spoke to someone recently who asked me, isn't investing another word for gambling? Now, this is so far from the truth, it is actually harmful. Your money isn't safe in a cash ISA. In fact, it is pretty much guaranteed to lose value over time. And that is because of inflation. Inflation means that your cash won't buy you so much stuff in the future. So by keeping your money in cash or a savings account, you are guaranteeing that you will be poorer in what you can do with your money, even if the number on the screen looks similar. We are very bad at, as human beings, thinking about big numbers or the concept of value in general. So we think, I've got £8,000 in savings. That's a lot of money. And then 8 years later, you think, I've still got my £8,000. But actually, it can do a lot less for you the further into the future that you go. And I've talked before on the podcast about the harms of inflation and how with so much money printing, that is inevitable that things will become less affordable unless you can grow your money at least in line with inflation. So your money's not safe in a cash ISA, it is losing buying power. You must invest your money if you are going to stay ahead or even keep in line with inflation. I read today that about 42% of people in the UK have an ISA, and this percentage generally increases with age. So it's more like 32% for 18 to 24-year-olds, and it gets to about 50% for the over 65s. But apparently only around 6% invest in a stocks and shares ISA. Now, investing with a stocks and shares ISA can be extremely simple. Investing doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to complicate things. If you just buy an index fund like VWRL, which is the Vanguard All World Fund, or VUSA, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 Fund, you'll be so much better off in the long run. Now, if you don't understand what I've just said in that last sentence, please do get in touch on Instagram I am David Morse, or Life to the Full podcast. I want to contrast with you for a minute the idea of investing or saving in a cash ISA or cash savings account as opposed to what happens when you invest it in the stock market. Investing £100 a month at an interest rate of 2%, which on average may be what you might get in a savings account, will mean that in 30 years' time you will have a little bit shy of £50,000, £49,545. That's off £100 a month. Whereas if you assume instead the stock market returns similar to what we've seen over the past hundreds of years, or 100 years, then that's about 10%. That £100 a month will be worth over £228,000 over the same 30-year period. 50,000 versus almost 230,000. That is the difference in 30 years of keeping your money in cash as opposed to investing it. It's pretty wild, isn't it? And there may be specific occasions where you might choose to consciously keep some cash aside in a cash ISA, but it's not at all a good place to keep money safe in the long run. Like I said, if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. Get in touch. Tip number 2 you really need to ignore is this. You can afford it if you can afford the monthly payments. This is bad advice for almost anything, but especially in relation to owning a house. It is the perfect recipe for being constantly in debt and never being free. I've heard people say if you don't have the cash to buy it twice, you can't afford it. I know some people who won't buy something unless they pay in cash and then add that amount to their investments. So if you want to buy a car for £10,000, you have to buy it with cash and put £10,000 into your stocks and shares ISA. You might think that's quite extreme, but it certainly makes you more conscious about your spending, and it should certainly make you think twice about committing to monthly payments to buy anything. Apart from the fact that you have obligations to someone else every month, if you're taking on payments up to your income, then you are trapped to your income. You can't afford to change your lifestyle because you're spending up to your income. You can't afford to take a lower paying job, to spend time with the kids when they're young, or because you want less stress because every penny is accounted for. I've seen this time and time again. People taking on monthly commitments and they are miserable because they can't change their jobs or their lifestyle, and they have to earn enough money to pay for all the stuff they've already bought. This is not even to mention the stress that comes from losing your job or getting sick and still having to pay for everything that you, quote unquote, could afford because you could afford the monthly payments. Number 3, treat yourself. You deserve it. How many times have you heard that or said it yourself? Another way to guarantee that you make absolutely no financial progress is to treat yourself whenever you feel like it. It's well recognized that being able to delay gratification is one of the best predictors of life success. Having a low time preference for money and stuff means a more stable and flourishing future. One of the reasons you're still poor could be too much of this attitude. You can train yourself to want less and be happier, or to control your spending and get ahead financially. Buying stuff is not a great way of addressing a deeper need within yourself to validate yourself. In fact, buying stuff, treating yourself because you deserve it, is most likely going to make you more miserable in the long run. It is much better to deal with any issues that make you feel like you don't deserve nice things. I'm not saying don't treat yourself ever. In fact, you should definitely celebrate achievements, occasions, bar mitzvahs, etc. And you should treat yourself. You should be comfortable spending money on yourself. I know a lot of people who struggle with that. It's not a healthy way to live either. Just don't use it as an excuse to sabotage your future self. Be intentional about your treats. As many of you know, if you've been listening since February, I took my daughter on a ski trip for a week, and this was very much a treat. It was something I had planned to do. I'd planned to do it for a while before we actually did it. Even from the first time that I bought my investment property, I said I'm going to use this to take my daughter skiing. What made it special for me was I didn't pay for the trip out of money I'd earned working. I bought an asset that paid for the trip. I found that another powerful mental framework to adopt. If I want to treat myself, I need to buy an asset that will pay for it. For example, I might buy some dividend stocks and use the dividends to treat myself, or buy a rental property and use the rent to buy something I want. Powerful mindset shift. Number 4, follow me for investment tips that will double your money in a few weeks. If you hear that, run. Anytime you hear anyone say they can promise extremely high returns, especially in a small time frame, you should be extremely skeptical. A friend of mine asked me for some advice a while back on an investment he was considering. He'd been added to a WhatsApp group, and the group was full of chat from people saying that they'd made a lot of money investing with such and such a person, and I had to tell him, get out immediately. That is not legit. You will lose anything you put into this. That's at the extreme end, but it can be as simple as listening to stock picks from your favourite YouTuber. It's easy to get caught up in the hype. I do confess that a number of years ago, I bought some individual stocks, not solely on the basis of YouTuber recommendations, but mostly based on hype and YouTuber recommendations. And they are almost all the worst performing assets that I own. Anytime you think it's too good to be true, then it almost certainly is. Apart from matched betting, which is actually just mathematics. But that's for another day. Tip number 5 that you really must ignore is debt is bad. Avoid any kind of debt for any reason. If you've been paying attention to the podcast, then you'll know I believe that being in debt is akin to being a slave. Your time, which you pour so much energy into working, is not yours because you're spending your time working to earn money which is pre-allocated to someone else, be it a credit card company, car lease company, Klarna, or whoever. You can't keep what you earn, so you're a slave. That's my general view on debt, particularly consumer debt. But I do believe in using debt wisely. It is a powerful wealth-creating tool when used in the correct way. I listened to a podcast this morning which encouraged people to set a goal of buying their first home with cash in their 20s. It's actually a fantastic goal to have, but most people will have a mortgage to buy their first house. This is using debt sensibly, as long as you don't fall into the trap of tip number 2. You use debt to buy an asset that will go up in value. This is most useful when buying rental properties. And that's what's great about using debt to buy houses, is that inflation will erode the value of your debt. This is opposite to tip number 1. You don't want to keep your cash savings uninvested because inflation will erode the purchasing power, but carrying debt on an asset means the relative amount of debt you have will get smaller over time. Again, if you've got any questions, I would love to hear from you. Financial tip number 6 that you definitely need to ignore is to keep working to get a pension. This is another one that has some element of truth, but it keeps you trapped. You should absolutely have a pension. Hopefully you have a workplace pension where your employer pays in if you do. So not paying into your pension is throwing away potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds. So you should definitely do that. You should also probably have a private pension. Any plan that relies on the government to look after you, I'm afraid to say, is doomed to failure. Do not rely on the government to look after you when you are older. Almost certainly, the state pension in the UK and probably many other places in the world will not look anything like it does today in 30 years' time. I'm planning for not getting any state pension at all. I just don't think it'll be available to me by the time I'm 75. And if it is, great, I'll treat myself. The problem comes when you're staying in a job that makes you miserable just because you think you'll have a good pension. Apart from the fact that you may not be alive to get the pension when it comes, it's certainly not worth wasting your life to have a few extra bucks when you're 70. I see it over and over. People dying inside, grinding it out, because they've been conditioned to think that a good pension is the goal. I know so many people who are miserable towards the end of their career, and that could be 3 years, could be 5 years, could be still 10 years. People saying, oh, I've got a good pension, I need to work to get the good pension, and they are miserable. And it is not a way to live. There are so many other ways of preparing for retirement. You can do them instead. Number 7, and this is the controversial one. Tip number 7 you should ignore is pay off your mortgage to save on interest payments. This is a shocker to most people. Most people are conditioned into thinking, ooh, aren't I paying a lot of money on interest? Wouldn't it be great if I could not pay all that money in interest and instead pay off my house completely? Now, full caveat, I will probably eventually pay off my mortgage, but I have certainly no intention of paying it off early. And if I can use the debt on my house to get further ahead financially, then I absolutely will. I once made a video called Why Paying Off Your Mortgage is a Really Poor Financial Decision, so you can check that out on my YouTube channel if you so wish. But some of the main points are here. You can almost certainly get a higher rate of return on your investments than the interest on your mortgage. Let's just say that you have £150,000 mortgage over 25 years, and you want to overpay £200 a month. Now, assuming a mortgage interest rate of 4.5%, you will save £33,100 in interest payments over that 25 years. Now, don't forget, of course, the power of inflation eating away at the debt instead. That is point number 1. But also, importantly, if you had put that £200 a month into a stocks and shares ISA returning 10%, you would have amassed interest of, wait for it, £205,000, £336. Even at 8%, it would be over £130,000 in interest alone. In gains. Do you really want to miss out on £100,000 of interest? It makes absolutely no sense to me, even if it's a nice feeling not to have a mortgage. And that says nothing about the opportunity cost of if you're paying off your mortgage and you give your money to the mortgage company and then suddenly you need it for whatever reason, you can't very well easily phone up the mortgage company and say, you know those overpayments I've been making? Yeah, I'd quite like to have those back. That is not going to fly. Whereas if you keep your cash accessible in the form of investments, then not only will you likely outperform your mortgage by a long shot, you can also rely on that money if you so need it. If you end up losing your job, or if you end up facing financial difficulty, or even if you end up thinking, I need £10,000 to start a business, if you've funneled that money away, it's already gone. You won't be able to get that back. So that is another reason to not pay off your mortgage. I hope you've enjoyed this brief look at 7 financial tips you need to ignore. Hit me up in the comments on Instagram. Hit me up on the DMs. I'd love to know what your thoughts are, what you thought of this episode. It's David Morse or Life to the Full podcast. Till next time, it won't be long. We're going to look at 7 really bad health tips that you need to ignore. So don't forget to subscribe, tell a friend about the podcast, so that when that episode drops, you'll be on the airwaves ready to listen. Till next time, peace out.